Será tu iniciación a la investigación antártica. Antes le llamaban
los organismos que encontramos como peces, moluscos. Siempre estamos viendo, nosotros también, yo cuando termino de muestrear los pingüinos, analizamos en el laboratorio.
And welcome. You're watching I24 News coming to you from Tel Aviv. The top stories this hour. A threat to all member states. The European Union slams Lebanon's Hezbollah for threatening to attack Cyprus. Israel is losing the war in Gaza and we must take advantage. Hamas welcomes the comments by the IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari. And over 1,000 people now confirmed dead amid soaring temperatures on the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. First, Hamas officials are declaring that Israel has lost the war in Gaza. This a day after the IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari said in an interview with Israeli media that the group could not be defeated. In Doha, where he met Iran's acting foreign policy chief, the Hamas political leader Ismail Haniyeh called for Israel's enemies to join together and take advantage. Well, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, meanwhile, reacted with fury to those comments by Daniel Hagari. Take a listen.
We are at war on several fronts, and we face great challenges and difficult decisions. Therefore, I must demand that all coalition partners get a grip and rise to the occasion. This is not time for petty politics. This is not the time for legislation that endangers the coalition, which is fighting for victory over our enemies. We must all focus solely on the tasks before us, defeating Hamas, returning our hostages, and returning our residents safely to their homes, both in the north and in the south. And so I demand of everyone, put aside any other consideration, put aside any partisan interest, stand as one, united, behind our troops.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Eric Mandel is the founder and director of the Middle East Political Information Network and a senior editor for security at the Jerusalem Report. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Eric. Good to see you again. And as we just heard, Daniel Hagari's comments are being seized upon already by Hamas. But what about the bigger picture? What does this tell us about the relationship between the IDF and the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, it's also the relationship between Israeli society and the IDF. The Israeli society is still strongly supportive of the IDF. They're not so supportive of the Netanyahu coalition. I think the Hamas has picked up on some differences there, but I think the question here is, are you going to destroy Hamas's ideology, jihadist, Salafist ideology? No. We didn't destroy ISIS ideology or al-Qaeda's ideology. What you're trying to do is destroy their infrastructure. What is not being told and what is not being honestly communicated is that there is going to need to be a fight in Gaza for years. There's going to be a guerrilla warfare and insurgency because there are literally thousands of terrorists sitting in tunnels. More than half of the tunnels have not been identified. And that is something I believe that the government should be communicating to the Israeli people to manage their expectations and also telling privately and maybe publicly to the Americans.
So there's a problem of communication, clearly, but the army says it goes deeper than that because they say that the Prime Minister refuses to make a decision about what's next for Gaza, something we heard from the American government as well several months ago. Will it be a military occupation? Will there be an international force? What is the alternative? Because the army says it's running out of targets. It's done its job. The question is what happens next? Why do you think the Prime Minister is unable to articulate any kind of vision?
I think part of it is politics. He's dealing with the threat of Ben Gvir and Smotrich leaving, and then he will be out. Actually, he won't be out because until there's another election, he'll remain prime minister for a while. I think what needs to be understood is that this is going to go on for a while, and that everybody needs to just take a deep breath.
The war?
The war is going, and you're going to call it by another phase. So they won't have targets, but there's going to be plenty of incidents that are going to continue to happen. The government has made very clear it does not want to have a military occupation, but the IDF does need some type of day after understanding. Netanyahu is totally against a PA being involved or a reform PA being involved, and the Gulf states and the Egyptians don't want to be there as part of some force unless Israel is going to have the PA be there. And by the way, I'm not sure it's a great idea to have Gulf forces who will be in harm's way protecting Israelis. Their peoples are not going to be so happy about it. But the Prime Minister really cannot just keep saying we're going to defeat Hamas without giving some plan for the future.
Right, and of course, the IDF is made up of reservists, it's made up of young soldiers, people are becoming tired, people are getting exhausted, and of course, most importantly perhaps of all, is that there's still no agreement to get back the hostages. That appears to have died completely.
You know, it's funny, I was looking back over the last 8 months of the offers, and the offers of Hamas are less and less and less, and Hamas has a strategy. We saw that from the Wall Street Journal correspondence. You know, the deaths of our civilians are to our advantage, from Sinwar. And so getting back the hostages, I don't see them giving back all of the hostages. And again, we have no idea about how many hostages there. The whole idea of the international community has not demanded that the Red Cross go and have proof of life and check the status, and nobody really seems to care about it. So, you know, and the families, the pressure here, this is one giant family here in Israel. Everybody is 1 degree of separation away from somebody they know, or a family member or a relative or friend who's involved. So you have just tremendous pressures with a government that's not trusted.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on Prime Minister Netanyahu again, he's not only under pressure from his own army now, from the protests in the streets, but also his relationship with President Biden seems to be becoming increasingly strained. He released that video earlier this week attacking the US or attacking the Biden administration for delaying weapons shipments. I mean, what did you make of the timing of that?
You know, in tennis, they call it an unforced error. This was a big unforced error, totally unnecessary. And the idea, you know, that it really blindsided the administration, which doesn't have any love for the Netanyahu coalition anyhow. It really was just a really poor. The only thing I can think of was political, that he was pandering to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich to do that. But the relationship, this needs to be nurtured. Israel is dependent upon the United States for many things, not just in the short term, but certainly in the medium term and maybe the long term. And this is not the time during this to look for other fights. There are plenty of disagreements that will happen.
And of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu has been invited to speak before Congress next month. What are your expectations there?
You know, it's funny, in 2014, Israel's defense minister asked me if Bibi should go, and I said no. I said the timing was bad. I'm not sure the timing is good here. I'm not exactly sure what the point is with such vitriol against Netanyahu that's there, and it really will bring out the political divide. I know Netanyahu thinks it's good and he can make and he's an incredibly articulate spokesman, but he's so tainted by Democrats in the administration. I'm just not sure that there are more positives than negatives of him going.
Right, because historically, when an Israeli prime minister goes to speak in the US, his favourability ratings tend to go up. But as you say, this is quite a different case. We might see this turn out very badly for the Prime Minister if it doesn't go right.
Well, I think there's already people who said they won't be there, but those are the usual Israel bashers that are there. But again, with the Biden administration so antagonistic, many Democrats who are considered supportive of Israel are going to have more of a muted response, say kind of the right things. I just don't really see the great upside here. I just see this as more divisive.
Okay, Eric Mandel for now. Thank you very much indeed. Well, the Lebanese government, meanwhile, is trying to head off a diplomatic crisis with Cyprus after Hezbollah threatened to attack the island. We'll have more on that in just a few moments. Let's get the latest, though, on the fighting between the IDF and the Iranian-backed terrorist group. Our Zach Andrews joins us now from the north of Israel. So, Zach, the IDF says it killed another senior Hezbollah commander today. What do we know about this individual?
Yeah, this is Fadl Ibrahim, was killed in an alleged drone strike in the Deir Kifa area, which is about 8.5 miles parallel with Kiryat Shmona inside Lebanese territory. It's, again, a recurring story throughout the last 8 months of this conflict that the IDF has been targeting field operatives of Hezbollah. Now, Hezbollah, in their own response or announcement of his death, has not called him a commander of any kind. And we should say that, through Hezbollah's structure of how they promote the leadership of some of these military operatives in southern Lebanon, that some of this leadership is dispersed among multiple figures. So throughout the course of this conflict, we've had over a dozen IDF, the IDF has claimed over a dozen field commanders have been killed of these regional Hezbollah command structures throughout southern Lebanon. But, what impact does that have in the present tense is the big question mark. And, going forward, should a wider conflict erupt here, what influence will that have on the conflict? Well, a lot of these men, and we can't say speak specifically to the background of this man in particular, but a lot of these men in these senior roles have seen battle, have seen combat experience in Syria over the last 2 decades. So there's likely some significance here, but Hezbollah, again, not calling him a commander. Hezbollah's own announcement today, though, brings their total acknowledged death count to 349.
All right, Zach, thank you very much. Zach Andrews there up in the north of Israel. Well, the European Union, meanwhile, has warned that Hezbollah's threats to Cyprus represent a threat to every member state. This a day after the Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah, accused Nicosia of taking part in military drills with Israel. The Cypriot Prime Minister responded by saying his country was not a part of the Middle East conflict. Take a listen.
Cyprus must be warned that opening Cypriot bases and airports to the Israelis to target Lebanon means that the Cypriot government has become part of the war, and the resistance will deal with it as if it is part of the war.
The Republic of Cyprus is not involved in any way in the hostilities. The Republic of Cyprus is not part of the problem. The Republic of Cyprus is part of the solution, and our role, as it was manifested, for example, through the humanitarian corridor, is recognized not only by the Arab world, but the entire international community. The statements are not pleasant, and they do not correspond to the truth, in the attempt to present an image of Cyprus being involved in military operations under no circumstances.
Well, we can go now live to Nicosia. Tom Cleaver is a journalist at the Cyprus Mail. Thanks for being with us, Tom. So just how concerned are the Cypriots about this pretty direct threat from Hezbollah?
Well, low level of concern, I would say. I mean, the threats were made, and Cyprus, of course, is in the neighborhood. But it's not like there is panic in the streets. I mean, the government has said, that we're not involved in this war. We're not involved in any conflict in the region at the moment, or nor have we been for the last 50 years. And therefore, the government has pretty confidently said, look, we want to have good relations with all of our neighbors. And as a result, we have reached out to the Lebanese government, and they've said, look, with the Lebanese government, we have good relations. And Hezbollah is Hezbollah. They've said something, but the Cyprus government is not overly panicked by statements made by Hezbollah. Of course, there's concern. The government has said it's taking measures to ensure safety, but it's not panic in the streets by any means.
Lebanon's foreign minister has already been on the phone with his Cypriot counterpart. I mean, in more normal times, what is the relationship between Cyprus and Lebanon like?
We have very good relations with Lebanon, as far as I'm concerned. I think it was just 2 months ago that President Nikos Christodoulidis was in the Lebanon with Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission. Obviously, recently with the migration crisis, our relations with Lebanon have been very important because Lebanon has been the point of departure from the Middle East for a lot of asylum seekers and migrants coming to the European Union. And therefore, we've had to very much keep our relations with the Lebanon very strong, and that's involved meetings with the European Union. Christodoulidis, as I said, went with von der Leyen to the Lebanon quite recently, and those things are very important. And yeah, Cyprus prides itself, and the government has said this on numerous occasions in the last few months especially, this country prides itself on having very good relations with all of its neighbours, and Lebanon is very much a part of that.
And of course, Cyprus is partly occupied by Turkey. We're approaching the 50-year anniversary of that occupation. I believe President Erdogan is due to visit the island. Are there any concerns that he might seek to exploit the situation? We've seen how he has embraced Hamas and other terrorist groups in the past.
I'm not sure there would be specific appetite for that among. I don't foresee it. I don't think relations between Turkey and Iran have ever been too strong in the first place, so I don't think there would be a will to endorse openly or even covertly Hezbollah on his part. In any case, the Cyprus problem is nearby but detached from this general conflict anyway, and I think that the idea of some form of Hezbollah-esque thing happening here is not very likely, and I think Erdogan knows probably to steer clear of doing that, especially given that he says he wants to have a relationship with the European Union. Of course, that must pass through Cyprus, as Cyprus has been a member state for the past 20 years, and therefore I think he would be wise not to do that.
Interesting. Tom, thank you very much. Tom Cleaver there.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, joining us now in the studio, Yaakov Lapin, Military and Strategic Affairs Analyst at the Miriam Institute, the Jewish News Syndicate and the Alma Centre. Eric Mandel remains with us as well. Yaakov, thanks for being with us. So nobody saw that coming, did they? Hezbollah directly threatening to attack Cyprus. What do you make of it?
Well, look, I think, we're at the stage where Nasrallah is essentially telling Israel and the region what will happen if war breaks out. And he's signaling to everybody. It's a kind of warning. So he's telling the Cypriots, look, Hezbollah has noticed the military alliance that has been in place between Israel and Cyprus, Israel and Greece, the Mediterranean alliance. Israel trains on a regular basis in Cyprus, Israeli forces, ground forces, air forces, and in Greece.
Could that not be at risk, in your view?
I don't think that that's at risk because this is an interest-based alliance, and the Cypriots and the Greeks have a lot to gain from this military cooperation from Israel. In fact, they've been very concerned by Turkish aggression, and that's one of the reasons why I think they've been moving closer to Israel over the years. I think that what Nasrallah has been saying is, look, we know that Cyprus could act as a backup port, and I'm not talking about a military port. I'm talking about a backup civilian port, not a naval base, but a port for getting goods into Israel if Israeli seaports come under fire. And he is saying if Israel is counting on that, don't count on that. We will see that as Cyprus entering the war. So I think he's really trying to tell Israel, he's actually trying to deter Israel from escalating this situation. I think that's what this is all about.
And do you think he would have got the green light to essentially threaten the European Union from Iran?
100%. I think that everything that Nasrallah says is closely coordinated with his Iranian masters in Tehran. There are IRGC people sitting on the Shura Council. That's the decision-making council of Hezbollah, and this is all very coordinated, closely coordinated. What's at stake here is essentially, the Iranian Hezbollah axis wants to stop Israel from finishing off the Hamas terror army. They, in my reading, are trying to save Hamas. This is what this is about. That's why they're continuing to fire in the north and keep the IDF divided between two fronts. And Israel is saying, look, this situation can't continue forever. So every side is signaling what its red lines are. And the Iranian Hezbollah axis is telling Israel, if you want to go to war, these will be the costs, and they're going to be very high.
All right, a bit unusual, but I want to go back to the topic we were discussing earlier, if you don't mind, because I do want to get your opinion on it. Eric and I were talking about the comments made by Daniel Hagari, the IDF spokesman, saying that Hamas cannot be defeated, it's an ideology. Just what does that tell us about the relationship between the IDF and the Prime Minister, who hit back at those comments pretty strongly?
The relationship is strained. And, this discussion about what can and cannot be defeated in Gaza, I think, both sides are really just trying to sort of pass the buck, because at the end of the day, nobody has claimed that Hamas as an ideology can be eradicated. Nobody believes that. We have neo-Nazis, decades after the Nazi regime was defeated. But what this war is about is removing the capabilities of that jihadist ideology from ever raising an army again that can threaten our South, our people, and essentially our continuity and existence. That's what this war is about. So these are all sort of attempts, I think, to signal one side to the other about what should come on the day after. And the day after is coming very, very quickly. It's actually probably going to be July, because by then the high-intensity phase of this war will be over. And then the big question is, what will happen? And there are major differences of opinion about what should happen. It seems that the IDF is indicating that it wants some sort of Arab force, it wants regional cooperation. I don't think the IDF is interested in setting up a military administration in the Gaza Strip. I'm not sure that the IDF is correct, that there's any alternative at this stage, except to do that as an interim temporary stage. But what is clear is that if another vacuum is left, then Hamas will resurge.
All right, Yaakov, for now, thank you very much indeed. Moving on to other news now. The United States says it killed a senior ISIS official in a strike on Syria earlier this week. According to America's allies, the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, the strike occurred in Turkish-controlled territory. The US named the ISIS suspect as Usama Jamal al-Janabi. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Michael Pregent, foreign policy and national security consultant and a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute, and himself a former US soldier who served in Iraq. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Michael. So, first of all, how common are these strikes, and is fighting ISIS still a priority for the US, given everything else that's happening in the region right now?
Yeah, I think. Thanks for having me. I think the U.S. can always focus on ISIS as far as hitting them, no matter what the U.S. is doing in the region. The one thing we are willing to do is target a foreign terrorist organization like ISIS anywhere they pop up. We need to also have that same strategy when it comes to Hamas and other groups, because they're also foreign terrorist organizations. What concerns me about this is, once again, we see a NATO ally, Turkey, targeting U.S. allies, meaning they are against the Syrian the forces that the U.S. put together, specifically the YPG in northern Syria. And we see another ISIS fighter along with other al-Qaeda operatives operating in Turkish-controlled territory. Why is our NATO ally not more concerned about ISIS and al-Qaeda than they are with Kurdish soldiers that are working with the U.S. to counter ISIS?
Well, meanwhile, on ISIS, Iraq has pledged to repatriate all of the Iraqi ISIS fighters who are being held in the Al-Hol prison in Syria by 2027. We're talking about some 20,000 people. What are your thoughts on that? Is that possible?
It's possible, but here's what it really means is Brett McGurk set this up in Iraq about 3 years ago, where Iraq would take all of these ISIS fighters. Now, we have to also be careful what we label an ISIS fighter. When Assad's forces or when the YPG says these guys are ISIS fighters, a lot of times it's just Sunni military-age males that were under ISIS control. So to say that there are 20,000 ISIS fighters in a prison, they're not all ISIS fighters. And what Brett McGurk set up about 3 years ago was that Iraq would be able to handle them by condemning some to death or putting some in prisons. And once they get into the Iraqi judicial system, a lot of them are disappeared. A lot of them are executed. And the intel or the information is not where it needs to be. An international court needs to oversee what Iraq is doing, because they'll basically go off two sworn statements from two undisclosed individuals that will say Muhammad is an ISIS fighter, and they'll send them to death within seconds. And that creates more instability in the Sunni areas of Iraq and Syria, and it allows groups like ISIS and al-Qaeda to recruit Iraqis that believe they're being disenfranchised or simply targeted because they're Sunni.
We've been talking about comments by the IDF spokesman Daniel Hagari here, who said that Hamas is an ideology and it cannot be defeated. Do you see any similarities with ISIS?
I thought what he said was spot on. Nobody's talking about defeating the ideology. You're talking about defeating or degrading a military capability. ISIS, again, built a brand, and ISIS built one of the strongest brands out there for a terrorist group, meaning that anybody who conducts an attack anywhere can claim loyalty to ISIS, and ISIS gets credit for that. So how do you defeat that? You can't defeat that. But what you can defeat are those military capabilities on the ground, that al-Janabi, right, to be able to target him and kill him and see how that degrades ISIS operations that are being planned now, or ISIS operations that were in the planning stages. Those are the things you can do. As far as defeating an ideology, what we learned during the Iraq War and the Sunni insurgency is the only way to defeat the Sunni insurgency is to have Sunnis denounce it, is to develop a clear and hold force that is Sunni, that rejects al-Qaeda, that rejects ISIS. We didn't do that in Iraq during the ISIS campaign. We countered ISIS with a Shia militia group called the Hashd al-Shabi in Iraq. And in Syria, where we simply could have built a Sunni force to go against al-Qaeda and ISIS, we used Kurds. So they're not a credible hold force. Not to say that anything bad about Kurdish forces in Syria, but they can't effectively hold territory unless you're actually from that sect. You're from that area.
So do you think Israel is making similar mistakes to the ones made by the US in Iraq?
No, I don't. You degrade capability. And then, you know, I would love to see the Israelis just drop a bunch of pamphlets and say that, hey, we're going to give you a reward for taking out Hamas leadership. I mean, every military-age male in Gaza has access to an AK-47. They should grab one of those AK-47s like we did with the Iraqi insurgency in Iraq and take out al-Qaeda. We basically armed the Sunnis in Iraq to counter al-Qaeda and to counter the militias. I would love to see an effort of creating an awakening inside of Gaza, where Palestinians have had enough with Hamas, and there are some selective takeouts, some selective targeting of Hamas leaders. That's what we did during the surge. Israel is trying to get hostages out. Israel's not looking to build an insurgency to counter Hamas. They're looking to get hostages out and then deal with Hamas later. But part of that dealing with Hamas later, empower those Sunni military-age males, give them $200 a month, give them an AK-47 and have them target al-Qaeda, or correction, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad operatives. That's what we did in Iraq during the surge.
Michael Pregent, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Michael Pregent there. Eric Mandel, just real quick, do you see any similarities with what we were just speaking about?
Yeah, the similarities are, and I think we all in agreement, is you're not getting rid of an ideology, you are degrading its military capabilities. And when you put them on the defensive, you can target isolated ISIS or al-Qaeda targets. Same thing is going to have to happen in Gaza, but the relationship in Gaza is probably closer to what Israel's been doing in the West Bank, every day going in and extracting terrorists, having operations, and there really is a template for managing Gaza in phase 4. All
right, Eric Mandel, thank you very much. We're going to take a very short break. When we come back, Canada has designated the IRGC, Iran's Revolutionary Guards, as a terrorist organisation. We'll get the details on that for you next. Stay with us.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Welcome back. Canada has listed Iran's Revolutionary Guards as a terrorist organisation. It follows years of lobbying by the Canadian opposition, along with some members of the Iranian diaspora. Iran has called the move unwise. For more on that, we're joined by Kaveh Shahrouz, lawyer and senior fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. Good to see you again, Kaveh. So, first of all, what will be the immediate consequences of this designation?
Very good to be with you, Laura. It's difficult to know exactly what the consequences will be. Yesterday, the announcement was made and the IRGC was put on the terrorist list for Canada. But it remains to be seen what actions the government will actually take. Now, if the government identifies IRGC members and officials in Canada or identifies their assets, bank accounts, other investments, then it can take action. So if there are people that are members of the IRGC, they can be arrested for being members of a terror group. They can be put on trial under our criminal code. If there are assets, those can be frozen. But it remains to be seen whether or not the government's actually going to take any steps to implement the listing yesterday.
And I mentioned that this was a move by the Canadian opposition, but members of the Iranian diaspora helped to bring this about. I think you yourself were involved in this campaign as well, if I'm not mistaken. Just tell us a bit about how that worked.
Correct. I've been very engaged in this file for a number of years. Almost 10 years ago, over a decade ago, I spoke to Canada's Senate and asked them for this listing, and that request has been building and building over time, especially after the IRGC shot down a flight, PS752, killing a whole number of people, including many Canadians. We have been lobbying very hard, meeting with a lot of government officials, making the case to them that the IRGC is a threat not just to Iranian people inside the country, it's a threat to the entire region. October 7th, we pointed out, was carried out by Hamas, which is basically a client of the IRGC. It's an extension of the IRGC. And we drew attention to the fact that the IRGC has killed Canadians, as I mentioned, on that flight. And Canada at the moment is engaged in trying to figure out the issue of foreign interference. You know, countries like Russia and China are set to interfere in Canadian politics, and the IRGC's name has come up repeatedly as being an agent of interference. So all in all, you know, we kept building the argument that the IRGC is a real threat to Canadian national security.
You seem to suggest that the government, the Trudeau government, might hesitate in implementing all of these measures. What do you mean by that?
Well, back in 2018, the Conservative Party brought forth, which is an opposition, they brought forth a motion asking for the IRGC to be listed as a terror group. And the Liberal government at the time accepted that motion, but took no actions. And they kept telling people like me, activists who were pushing for this, that they really couldn't do it, that they didn't think it was wise to do it. So they've made commitments, but they haven't actually carried them out. So yesterday, the announcement, obviously very welcome. This seems to be a real concrete step. But politically, you know, there is a history of them dragging their feet.
Kaveh Shahrouz, it's great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, with me in the studio this hour, Eric Mandel from the Middle East Political Information Network and senior editor at the Jerusalem Report, and Yaakov Lapin is with us as well from the Miriam Institute, the Jewish News Syndicate, and the Alma Center. Thank you both. So, Eric, do you think that Israel is being vindicated after years of trying to get the international community to recognise the threat from Iran, and in particular the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards?
Well, the idea it took so long to acknowledge what they are. The IRGC is a terrorist organization, and the Europeans very often, and even the Americans, try to split it, saying there's a difference between the political and the military wing. There's no difference. It's sort of like the same thing with Hamas, that you have the political leaders in Doha and you have the Sinwar there. These terrorist organizations are all integrated and they're all of the same purpose. So is Israel vindicated? The IRGC is a nefarious organization directly under the supreme leader that has led its proxy network, and it has its purpose is basically the annihilation of Israel, the killing of Jews. It should be very, very clear, and trying to hide it or not be clear about it. The question really is, will there be consequences when they find these in Canada, when they find that there are people that are affiliated? Will they do anything? In America, for example, we have people affiliated with Hamas, Americans, Muslims for Palestine and things like that, and people really can't get on top of them and can't sanction them even though they have a long paper trail. So is Israel vindicated? That's the point, is what are they going to do with what this new designation is, and will others join on and make real consequences?
Yeah, well, that's the big question, isn't it, Jakob? Will other countries follow suit? We've seen some very worrying incidents in the United Kingdom, for example, which is yet to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. Thugs essentially affiliated with the regime, going after dissidents, attempted murder of a journalist at Iran International, this kind of thing. Do you think that this might serve as a wake-up call?
Well, I hope so, but there have been already so many wake-up calls, and unfortunately, many in the West do prefer to go back to sleep because it's easier for them to kick the can down the road, or so they think. But look, I think, the IRGC is the main problem. It's the main problem in the region. It's the main problem in the world. It's the mechanism through which, as Eric just said, the Iranian regime implements its very dark, radical, and jihadist ideology. And therefore, yes, of course, it needs to be designated. That should be a no-brainer. The fact that this is only happening now or is still somehow in debate is really just a stain on there's no other word for me to describe it but cowardice that this is even the case in the Western world. But more importantly, I think the IRGC has got to be the target of non-stop, covert, regional international strike campaign. Its leaders have to be killed and its assets have to be taken out, because otherwise the IRGC is going to keep arming, fueling, and sending terrorist armies in our direction.
And it's everywhere, isn't it? It's a global threat now. It's in Latin America, it's in Europe, it's in the Americas.
Drugs coming from South America to fund them. I brought that up with a senator not that long ago who was not sympathetic with Israel, and I said, well, maybe you should care about Hezbollah. You care about the drug problem in America.
100%. So, of course, it's a major threat to international security. They're active everywhere. First, they try to infiltrate Shiite communities around the world and recruit, and they work together with the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence. They each have their sort of sectors of operation. But the bottom line is that there has to be a concerted international effort led by Israel, the United States, and partaken by the Sunni countries to target the IRGC, because if they're not targeted and if they don't spend their time trying to evade being targeted, they are going to go on the attack. And they do that through proxy warfare and also through direct attack. They have increasingly been involved in directly attacking. So whether it's getting the missiles to the Houthis that are now paralyzing international trade in the Red Sea, the Hamas mass murder attack on October 7th would not have been possible without the IRGC. Everything we're facing from Lebanon now is the IRGC. They are the puppet masters, and they have got to be targeted day in and day out. Otherwise, they're going to keep destabilizing and endangering our world.
All right. Thank you both. Well, let's look at what's happening inside Iran, because there are 6 candidates now competing to replace President Raisi, who was killed in a helicopter crash last month. The presidential election will take place on June 28th. There are 5 conservatives and 1 so-called reformist in the race. For more on that, we're joined by Camelia Entekabifad. She's the editor-in-chief at the Independent Persian. Great to see you as always, Camelia. Thank you for joining us. And let's talk about candidate Masoud Pezeshkian. Now, he has come out on TV and said he wants to relax the hijab laws. He wants to re-enter talks with the West on Iran's nuclear program. Is he a true reformist, or is this similar to what we saw with Hassan Rouhani all those years ago?
Greetings, dearest Laura, and to the viewers. The hijab resistance is not about one element in the regime, Iranian woman asking to get change. This is a society resistance to show their desire of the regime changes. And if we just elaborate or interpretate the wishes for not wearing a hijab or veil, we were misunderstood the Iranian public. I studied in Iran too. I am the one finished the higher university in Iran, get job and working for the newspaper. And that was the highlight of our life, to show our wishes to changing the system, to protest the regime by not wearing the hijab properly. So it doesn't give us this sense to the public if Masoude Pezeshkian wants to have the hijab codes a little bit loosened, that means he is addressing the public demands for the regime change. This is one point. And speaking about the reformists, they totally lost their credential, their support, and everything through the public. We had Khatami and we had Rouhani, two major presidents, former president, which they were elected as telling the people they want to make the massive changes in the society. Not they only never completed, but also they show how much they were supporting this system, Ayatollah Khamenei and the Islamic Republic. I'm seeing zero chances for Pezeshkian to become popular, or he can make the huge public support to come and cast their votes in his favor.
So do you think that the public will be swayed by this? Do you think that we will see that reflected in the turnout? Because we saw a very poor turnout, didn't we, for the legislative elections a short while ago. What kind of turnout do you expect in the presidential election?
It wouldn't be much more, as we saw that 3 years ago. We know the number of these participants always manipulated by the system. Having Pezeshkian at this special tournament, there would be telling us the regime wants to give the world, the international community, the sense of there are two different candidates at this rate, reformists and the conservatives. And at the bottom line, they would say, okay, then Iranian people prefer the conservatives. They want to make some justification for electing conservative candidates.
And if I could get your opinion on that move by Canada, who have decided to designate the IRGC, the Revolutionary Guards, as a terrorist organisation. Do you see this as a turning point? Do you expect other countries to follow suit? And is this a blow to the regime?
I have a different opinion about speaking who is a terrorist and who is not. Terrorism and calling the group as a terrorist, it's so much politicized these days, as there is not exact explanation for that in the Western countries. When once they can call the Houthis terrorists, put them in the terrorist list, and they're lifting it up and again putting it back. Taliban called terrorists, and this terrorist group is still at the terrorist list of the United States, but freely able to travel to Qatar. It gives us how far and how much the Western nation can implement this order of a group called inside of a terrorist list. And speaking particularly about the IRGCs called in the terrorist list of the Canada has to answer us Iranians, what about the wealth these 45 years from the IRGC's members and their groups has been brought to Canada? Everyone knows what a huge community of the associated regime's members now living in Canada. They have their citizenship and the wealth. What about that? Is Canada is going to strip the citizenship of some of these IRGC or their affiliated family members in Canada? Are they going to freeze their assets and send it back to Iran or give it to the Iranian people? When those questions will answer to us, we can believe that better in what condition and how Canada wants to treat IRGC's members when they are in the terrorist list.
All right. Camelia Entikavifad, great to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And a word from you, Eric and Yaakov, on Iran, because the other hope is, of course, that the regime will crumble from within, whether the people will be able to overthrow the regime. We saw, of course, the protests against the killing of Mahsa Amini petering out over the last year or so. But do you get a sense of where that is now inside the country?
I think it's impossible to predict. It should be encouraged. Every possible way to destabilize that regime should be pursued in a clandestine manner, and all opponents of that regime within Iranian soil should get as much assistance as possible. But we have no idea if and when the regime will fall, because it's not a science. And even the most let's call them the ones with the best sensors in the Muslim world, the Mukhbarat, the Egyptian intelligence services, had no idea that a revolution was about to hit Egypt, and they were very well entrenched in their own society. So we here in Israel could not predict when that would happen in Iran, but definitely the push should constantly be given, first and foremost, I think, by the United States, which has the resources to do that, but certainly also the Sunni powers, perhaps Israel as well. But as much as possible, the opponents of that regime should be helped.
And Eric Mandel, of course, Iran is advancing rapidly with its nuclear program. The IAEA has given out numerous warnings. President Biden has made it clear he wants to get back into some kind of nuclear deal. Was that the wrong policy to chase after Tehran on that? And we're now seeing the consequences?
Well, I was involved a little bit as a front row seat of the JCPOA from going from 2013, 14, 15. It was a horrible deal. However, when President Trump left without a plan B, that was not good either. But right now, when people are keeping so focused on the nuclear enrichment, that is a fait accompli. They can get to 90%. That's for sure. They have the means to deliver them. We know they're ballistic missiles. You have one lying here in Israel. What they don't have yet is the weaponization, and that is really where things should be targeted. As far as my country and regime change, we have done a very poor job about that. We have acquiesced, we have appeased. That is the worst thing we could do. We need to be pro-Iranian American, means pro-Iranian people, because once you target the regime, then you have a chance of bringing down their house of cards. And that would be the most important thing for true stabilization, not appeasement.
All right. Eric Mandel, Yaakov Lapin, thank you very much to you both. Now, millions of people have been displaced and are at risk of starvation in Sudan. It's been described as the world's worst humanitarian crisis in decades. The war between the Sudanese army and the paramilitary rapid support forces are raising fears of a new genocide in Darfur. Our Nasri Nassar has this report.
Just over a year ago, civil war broke out in Sudan. 2 million refugees fled to other countries around Sudan, and 10 million were displaced inside the country. The Norwegian Refugee Council has described the situation in Sudan as the world's most neglected displacement crisis. The United Nations UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, has urged concerted international efforts to resolve the conflict between the warring factions.
The biggest appeal that I want to make is to the military people that are fighting each other and reducing this country to ruin and to rubble. They have to stop. This war has to stop. Peace is the only solution so that we can help properly these people and all those to whom we have no access because of the war, and we can move back to peace building, to development, to a better future for all those that are living here.
Grande recently visited refugee camps and displacement centers in Kosti in Sudan's White Nile state, where over 1 million people have sought shelter since the war started.
Let's be very clear. The civilians are the ones that have no responsibility, no fault of their own in this conflict, and yet, as so often happens, they are the ones paying the highest price.
Data from the UN showed that the deadly clashes in Sudan have claimed more than 15,000 lives so far and have left millions of Sudanese at imminent risk of famine. But a source told I24 News that these numbers for civilian deaths are only for west of Darfur state. The total number is much higher.
Now, as many as 1,000 people are feared dead from heat exhaustion following extreme temperatures at the Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. Bodies were seen on the streets of the Muslim holy city of Mecca, where temperatures topped 49 degrees. It's the worst death toll at the pilgrimage in almost a decade. Well, with us now, Loay Al-Sharif is peace activist and expert in Arab-Israeli relations. Thank you for being with us, Loay. And this is a simply horrific situation, isn't it? Really shocking images coming from Saudi Arabia, and we still don't know the exact death toll, do we?
No, we don't. But first of all, Laura, allow me to say this: that may the memories of those pilgrims who died be a blessing, and may God have mercy on their souls. Allah yarhamhum. Indeed, we don't know the exact death toll yet, but I believe the Saudi authorities will provide more details about these incidents in the coming days. Hajj is not an easy task, Laura. I have performed Hajj twice, and it requires significant crowd management. It is crucial for people to follow the authorities' directives, especially regarding permits. Before you perform Hajj, Laura, you need to have some sort of a Hajj permit that would allow the authorities to do some sort of a crowd management to manage the pilgrims.
So that the authorities know how many people are coming and where they will be, etc. So what exactly happened? Because sadly, there are always some deaths at the Hajj. But this is a staggering number of casualties, not seen since, I think it was 2015 when there was a stampede and hundreds of people died. What exactly went wrong this time?
So let me tell you this, Laura, to clarify this to you and to your audience. Saudi Arabia is the managing authority of Hajj. It requires pilgrims to obtain a permit. This is slowly, by the way, Laura, for the sake of managing the crowd effectively. Additionally, Saudi manages its hospital capacities and other facilities during the Hajj, which usually lasts 4 to 5 days, from the 8th month of Hajj, Yom al-Tarwiyah, to the 13th. But you know why, Laura? I'll tell you something that many in the world do not know, that if the pilgrims have problems, or if they fall ill or need surgeries during Hajj, they are offered this for free. Offering such services to unlimited number of people without the ability to manage the crowd and capacity would be unfeasible. So many of those pilgrims, and I don't want to shift the blames to them, may their memories be a blessing, but many of those pilgrims used the tourist visas and they went to Hajj without alerting the authorities of their location, of their whereabouts. So if they have a sunstrike or something, or if they have even some kind of strokes, the authorities would never be able to reach them because they are not counted for. So this is what usually goes wrong during Hajj seasons. Pilgrims who are not registered, who do not follow the authorities' legislations, usually fall into this undesirable fate.
And clearly, Laura, climate change is playing a role. It's getting hotter and hotter all around the world.
More air turbulence, by the way, Laura, and more air turbulence and more many things. Yeah, I do believe in the climate change. Yeah.
Well, this is. And as I understand it, the Hajj moves 10 days ahead every year. So over the next few years, it will be even closer to the peak of summer, won't it? So what are the authorities planning to do to stop this from happening again?
So there are increasing awareness campaigns about the need to obtain Hajj permits. Some people, as I said, misuse the tourist visas and go to Mecca a couple of days before Hajj begins, which can lead to uncontrollable situation. I believe the authorities have the right to manage the crowd for the safety of all pilgrims, by the way, Laura, first and foremost. So more awareness campaigns to the pilgrims to tell them that you need to obtain the permit, Laura. By the way, the permit is not is not for any other reason other than just managing the crowd. The authorities need to know, where is your tent? Where are you located? How can we reach you if something wrong happens? But if you are not registered, and if you go to Hajj like one of the pillars of Islam, of course, but it's always attached to one condition: the ability to do the Hajj. So if you are not capable of doing it, if you're not capable of obtaining the right visa and the right permit, do not do it. Unfortunately, some people think that they have to do it even if they are not capable. So more awareness campaigns hopefully would solve this situation. And inshallah, next year we don't see any incident.
Absolutely. And just briefly, do you have any idea of how many people participated in the Hajj this year?
Around nearly 2 million, 1.8. I have, many people in Hajj ministry. We're stating great numbers, but imagine, Laura, imagine the crowd management of 2 million people in a very small spot, not entirely Mecca, by the way. As I told you, the Hajj is not in entire Mecca, is in Arafah, Mina, and Al-Haram. So imagine a very small spot contains 2 million people. The crowd management is tremendous, and the Saudi authorities have been doing a great job, but people need to follow what the authorities say and need to get the right permits in order to let the authorities deal with unforeseen incidents.
Very tragic. Well, condolences, of course, to the families of people who lost ones there. Thank you very much, Lawai. We appreciate it. Lawai Al-Sharif there. Now, is Israel doing enough for the survivors of the October 7th massacre? Well, some groups are springing up independently, such as the Nova community. They helped those who escaped the massacre at the music festival, and they'll be raising funds at a concert in Tel Aviv later this month. Take a look.
On the morning of October 7th, when Hamas militants crossed into Israel and launched a violent attack against the country's south, more than 3,000 people were at the Nova Electronic Music Festival, a short 3.3 kilometers from the Gaza border. As they ran across orchards and fields in an attempt to escape Hamas, more than 360 of the festival attendees were killed. Others were abducted.
We start running east. I ran for 5 hours, 20 kilometers, until I got to Moshav called Patish. And then I hide for 4 more hours in a house of an amazing family that let us in.
Since then, the Nova community has established a wide range of therapeutic services and assistance for survivors, including art, travel, horse riding, surfing, and ice baths. The people organizing the music event were just a loose network of friends. However, during the last 8 months, they have developed a strong bond of support for each other.
I feel much better. There's still breakdowns, I call that, a panic attack, a blocking in the mind. I don't know how to say it, like disconnections from reality. But I'm much better. I'm going out, I can dance, I can smile.
To raise awareness and funding for their operations, the community is planning a 50,000-person concert in Tel Aviv, with performances featuring mainstream Israeli artists alongside electronic scene DJs.
Someone asked me if I can dance again. And in the beginning I said no. And I didn't know if I'm going to dance again. But today I can say that I need to dance again, we have to dance again, not only for me, for all the people that I lost.
At a lake in Tel Aviv, survivors come together for a community day where they may consult psychologists and engage in therapeutic activities.
Once a week, we're meeting here, all the people that survived the Nova and the families of the people that are not longer with us, or the hostages family from the Nova. We just together to take care of each other, to get better in the mental health, just not to be alone.
One survivor says despite losing her partner, she chooses life, to continue and to be out and dance for him as well. She adds that this is her victory.
A very worthwhile cause. Well, we'll leave it there. Thanks very much for watching. Do stay with us on I24 News. Kalev Ben-David is with you next. Goodbye.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I24 News.
I24 News launches its 4th channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I24 News.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben David. It is day 258 of Israel's war. And while the fierce fighting continues in Gaza, the focus is... And while the IDF continues to carry the fight against Hamas and Hezbollah in Gaza and on the northern front, the government increasingly finds itself trying to contain the diplomatic tensions arising from those conflicts. Nowhere is this concern greater than regarding Israel's ties with its closest and greatest ally, the United States. The Biden administration stood firmly behind Israel in the months following October 7th, but more recently, the differences between Washington and Jerusalem over how these conflicts should be conducted and concluded, and the disputes arising from those divergent views have become more evident, nowhere more so than in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's unprecedented public message this week, accusing the U.S. of, quote, withholding weapons and ammunition to Israel in a time of crisis, a claim that is denied by the White House. In an interview today with I-24 News senior diplomatic correspondent Owen Alterman, U.S. Ambassador to Israel Jack Lew said that Netanyahu's statement was, quote, not constructive, while still insisting that the relationship between the allies remains on firm footing. The ambassador addressed other aspects of the conflict in Gaza and northern Israel. Let's take a listen.
So, Ambassador Jacob Lew, thank you so much for being with us. I'll start in the obvious place. The video put out by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and obviously the reaction in Washington. Is that incident behind us?
Well, first, I want to be clear that the U.S. has, since October 7th, been providing an unprecedented amount of military support for Israel at a pace that is, just been very rapid. And I think, as is well known, there was one shipment of large diameter munitions that was put on hold, and there's been conversations going on about the conditions under which they would be delivered. Apart from that, everything that is in the process is in the normal process.
I would imagine that the Biden administration was surprised to see a video like that. Yeah. Beyond the issue of the shipment itself, the psychology surrounding it. Do you trust Benjamin Netanyahu?
So I can speak to the facts. I'm not going to try to analyze why the video was released. The fact that really is important is that one shipment was put on hold and everything else continues to go. There is a challenge in keeping up the pace at which the U.S. has delivered munitions, just because we're no longer at the beginning of the process. We're deep into it. And we'll have to work together on a technical level to make sure that we continue to provide things as they're needed. I don't think it was constructive to have this be a public conversation. Look, I think the relationship between the United States and Israel is deep and long, and it has never produced more strength and better results than under the current president. There's nothing that I see that changes the commitment that the president has and the United States has to supporting Israel and helping Israel defend itself. We've had serious questions through the war about different issues, and they've been very public, and we've discussed them. And I actually think it has been constructive, the way we've engaged. We've engaged the way friends engage to make sure that the contours of how the war is being fought meet our common values, and the way things like humanitarian assistance are provided meet our common values. And we haven't been shy about raising those issues. And I think that it's actually been beneficial in terms of the way things have gone.
The relationship with Benjamin Netanyahu personally, would you characterize it as a trusting relationship?
Yeah, I'm really not going to get into the kind of questions of personality and the release of the video triggered a reaction that speaks for itself. I think that the question of where we go from here is, how do you maintain the relationship, as I'm confident we will, so that we continue to provide the support that Israel needs, and we have the conversations where we agree and where we have differences, and I'm confident that we're going to continue to be able to do that.
Move on to the situation in the north. Amos Hochstein, the envoy for getting to an agreement between Israel and the forces on the other side of the border. What is he offering to Hezbollah and or to the Lebanese government to make an agreement happen? What are the tools at his disposal, and what is he offering them?
So Amos Hochstein has been back and forth between Lebanon and Israel many times, even in the 7 months that I've been here. And I think that over the course of the time I've been here, I've seen how attitudes in Israel have changed in a constructive way. If you had asked me in November, I thought that the skepticism was, just short of it's impossible. Now, a diplomatic solution is most everyone's preferred option. The question is, can you get there? My analysis of where we are right now is that if there were the ability to have closed the deal on the hostages and a ceasefire along with the release of hostages, we were in a place where I was optimistic that there was a diplomatic resolution, and I can explain why. I think with Hamas's rejection in the face of really most of the world saying it's time for Hamas to take the deal, we're now in a place where that's more challenging. And Lebanon will have to, and Hezbollah will have to make decisions. You ask what's in it for them. If they want to avoid a war, and if Israel wants to avoid a war, figuring out a diplomatic resolution is the way to avoid a war. That's something that both sides have an interest in. And there is certainly the possibility of that working out in terms of kind of both the facts on the ground and the ability to have oversight of that.
There's an issue of sequencing, right? Because the administration is arguing we can get a deal in Lebanon, but only if Hamas first says yes to a ceasefire. We can get to normalization with Saudi Arabia. For most of the last 6 months, the administration said, only if we get to a ceasefire in Gaza. Aren't you giving Hamas and, for all intents and purposes, Iran, veto power over the situation on the Israel-Lebanese border and veto power over the normalization?
No, I don't think that's a fair way at all to characterize. I mean, we've been engaged 24/7 in how do you get the hostages home? How do you get the living hostages back to their family? How do you repatriate those who've been lost? The only ones who can do that, who can release them, are Hamas. So you have no alternative but to negotiate with them indirectly, but it's not us giving them veto power. That's the cruel power of taking hostages. And that is the reality. We believe that we should stay on the course of pressing for that to happen because we want to save the lives of those hostages. It's not a question of are you giving Iran or someone else power.
Oh, of course the ceasefire and hostages has value in its own right. My question is this. Are you moving forward, and do you see a path forward for an agreement in the north between Israel and the forces on either side of the border without that ceasefire in the event that Hamas continues to say no, and also for Saudi normalization? Is the Biden administration trying for Saudi normalization independent of the ceasefire, not necessarily waiting for the ceasefire, but potentially being able to get there?
I think the answer to your question is not a simple yes or no. We have never said that we think the conversation with Hezbollah was intrinsically tied to that. It's a question of is Hezbollah prepared to enter into a conversation? And certainly our view is a diplomatic solution in the north is the right outcome. On Saudi Arabia, it's a slightly different question. There are things that U.S. and Saudi Arabia could do, with or without normalization. I think the likelihood of that providing real satisfaction is not that great for a host of reasons. If the goal is Saudi normalization with Israel, then again, the question is, what is Saudi Arabia prepared to do? there's two pieces. One is there's going to have to be some degree of quiet in Gaza. Whether that is the ceasefire and hostage deal or some other winding down of active hostilities, that can be explored. And the other is some recognition that there has to be engagement in a process that ultimately leads to Palestinian self-governance.
Ambassador, if there are any other messages you would like to get out to the American public, to the Israeli public?
I would go back to where you started. I mean, I think, as we are in the, 8th month of this war, I think you have to step back and look at the, rock-solid support the United States has provided to Israel to defend itself against the worst attack it has ever faced. And I think that is kind of the gold standard in terms of friendship and support. And I think those who raise questions about the commitment behind it are missing the story. It's done because it's in the interest of the United States. It's something the President of the United States, in his heart and his mind, believe in. And it's given Israel the ability to defend itself. I think the kind of flash of the day can distract from what is really a powerful and important moment in terms of U.S.-Israel relations and the support the U.S. has provided for the State of Israel.
Ambassador Liu, thank you very much.
Well, for more, let's bring in our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, in New York. And Mike, we heard at the United Nations, I see, and we heard Ambassador Liu reaffirming the solidity of the relationship between the U.S. and Israel, but he did describe Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments the other day as not being constructive, some more harsher words out of the White House just in the last few hours, and questions even reportedly within the Israeli government about the timing of that message.
That's right. John Kirby, the spokesman for the National Security Council, who has taken heat for being too pro-Israel, if anything, during this war, came out firing today, it seems, against Prime Minister Netanyahu for those comments. Kirby saying they were vexing, disappointing, and incorrect. He said he's not sure what would have prompted Netanyahu to make those comments critical of the Biden administration's apparently holding up of weapons transfers, of refusing to release bottlenecks of weapons transfers. And Kirby saying it's simply not helpful to the greater U.S.-Israel cause there to make the comments. He said that those sentiments have been expressed through various channels to the Israeli government and presumably directly to the Prime Minister as well. If those comments are coming from John Kirby, of all people, it's not a good situation. Meanwhile, an Israeli media report saying that several ministers and those close to Prime Minister Netanyahu, including two in Washington today, National Security Advisor Saki Hanegbi and Minister for Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer, tried to talk Netanyahu out of publishing that video. Dermer, according to the media report, at least saying, hold off until after we get back to Jerusalem to make those comments. Netanyahu went ahead anyway. Again, there just doesn't seem to be, nobody can come up with any specific reason or any benefit. That's the most important part, whether he's right or not, any benefit to making those particular comments the way and the timing that Netanyahu made them. So this story apparently to be continued. Sullivan, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, meeting with Hanegbi and Dermer today. Those two will meet with Secretary of State Tony Blinken as well in Washington in a separate meeting. There's been no rescheduled meeting yet for the U.S.-Israel Strategic Dialogue, a meeting that was apparently scheduled but either postponed or canceled, depending on who you ask, as a result of Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments earlier this week.
All right, Mike Wagenheim there in New York at the UN. Thank you, Mike. Joining us in studio for more, Ambassador Dror Eydar, the former Israeli ambassador to Italy in San Marino, and Reserves Lieutenant Colonel in the IDF, Doron Avital, the former commander of Special Forces in the Israeli military. And Dror, Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you, we heard the criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu's comments there, even more harsh from the White House, more diplomatically from Ambassador Liu, saying they were not constructive, and even within reports within the Israeli government, certainly over the timing of those comments.
Well, I think that
Netanyahu knows very well America more than any other politician in Israel. And if he came into the conclusion that in order to speak with the administration, with Biden administration, behind the scenes, he has to do what Jabotinsky and his father did back in the 40s. He called it the pressure doctrine. It means that when you have problem with the government, you go to the public opinion. And now you see that all the administrations and its representatives trying to defend, to apologize, to say that it is not true, etc., etc. So it means, according to my opinion, it means that if they say it, it is true. It means that the the White House withhold.
Well, they denied it. They said it was only
yes,
the bunker buster
bombs. But this is how they deal with it. So, but I think that there is another sentence. It's only my opinion.
Sure, of course.
Another sentence in Netanyahu message, maybe sneaked under the radar. He said that Israel is the closest allies of the United States, fighting for its life, of fighting against Iran and all our mutual enemies. I think that there is the big issue, the huge dispute between Netanyahu government and Biden administration is the how we treat Iran. And I think that what they heard now, it's like a precursor of Netanyahu's speech in the next month in the Congress, because the issue is not Hamas, the issue is not Hezbollah, and not the Houthis. The issue is Iran, whom America tried during the time of Biden administration to appease Iran, or maybe to have some, I don't know, some agreements or to educate them. It appeared that nothing helped in it. Iran should be treated as an enemy of the whole Western civilization. And America, as the leader of this civilization, must understand that the whole civilization is under threat, not only Israel, also the UN, also Europe, and America too. We can see it in all the places all over the world. It's not, I mean, anti-Semitism, it's like a litmus paper, how do you say it?
Litmus test.
Litmus test for any war or riots that would come after that. Right. So this is, I think that this is what behind...
the underlying message. I want to get to Ron's thing, because the disagreement also stemmed on security cooperation, specifically, which has been kind of a sacred cow of the U.S.'s relationship.
Different perspective. I have to admit to a different opinion, of course. Just take into account the fact that the Houthis, the coalition against the Houthis, the naval coalition, this is the largest Navy operation since World War II. See what kind of resources the U.S. coalition led by the U.S. is invested in this conflict. And to talk about Iran isolated from the coalition that backed it up, like China or Russia, I think it would be a little bit irresponsible. I think his remarks were not in place.
You're talking about Benjamin Netanyahu.
I think he's playing the old partisan politics that he was playing the last time. And I think even this repeat of the speech in the Congress, of course, I think it's the same old trick, and I think this time it wouldn't work, because I don't think he has the same handle on the Republican Party that he used to have back then with Sheldon and his backing. So it's a new story. He's playing the same trick twice. I think also it's unfair to the way America assisted us in this campaign. I would use the term.
You mean too unfair to criticize them?
Yeah, of course. It's unfair. It's not polite. You don't do it among friends. The U.S. stood by us in the most dramatic ways possible. The Israeli public felt it with the famous Don't and saw it with all those operations in the 13th of April, the interception of the missile. I would say not okay.
All right, well, gentlemen.
The coalition help us to prevent this attack, did not let us to attack back in Iran. There was no response to this brutal attack. Okay. So we gave them to attack us, while America withheld Israel from retaliating.
They didn't hold us back.
What did we do?
They didn't hold us back. We attacked in Syria.
What did we do?
They didn't hold us back.
We
didn't want to act in more aggressive.
Who said we didn't want?
I'm saying it.
Who said we didn't want? You know that Netanyahu didn't want?
Netanyahu can.
Okay, gentlemen.
Seriously, I don't want to talk seriously about the subject because it's a deep subject. I think the worst mistake Israel ever made was the canceling of the Iran agreement of 2018.
Okay, gentlemen. Now we're going a little. We're going a little far. But clearly, there is a disagreement on that, and that is part of the debate we encourage here.
Therefore, we need more
on I-24 News. Well, let's move on, because we did hear Ambassador Liu also speak about the U.S. desire for a diplomatic solution to the Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel. But we have to say there was no glimmer of that horizon today as the Iran-backed terror militia continued its cross-border aerial assault, spurring some serious retaliatory fire today from the IDF. And for more, let's go to our correspondent who's up in northern Israel, Zach Anders. And Zach, Israel, of course, really, as I said before, striking back at Hezbollah as it attended its attacks in the north today.
Yeah, that's right. They claim to have killed another field commander. This is Fadl Ibrahim, who was allegedly killed in a drone strike. The IDF is claiming, actually, that this was their participation. They have announced the death of this man, saying he's a field commander of one of the southern units of Hezbollah near the border. He was killed in Deir Kifa. The Hezbollah has acknowledged his death. They do not call him a commander. The Hezbollah count now comes up to 349 on their side that they've admitted have been killed at this point in the conflict. We also see the IDF, based on Lebanese media reports, appears to have struck multiple other targets near the border once again. And Hezbollah claimed responsibility for 5 attacks. No reports of casualties in northern Israel, but we do have some light damage to a home in Zarit. And, you know, Kalev, we've entered into, I would say, a window where the headlines that are churning out, it's a bit of a doomsday cycle. We're seeing a lot of comments here from the community groups in the north about comments made by one of the CEOs of the national energy infrastructure here in Israel. He said that a full-on conflict with Hezbollah would overwhelm the electric grid, that they would obviously be an obvious target, and that they are not capable of restoring power within 72 hours of an attack. A lengthy comments made on his part at a conference in Israel just the other day. Today, he comes out and issues a retraction and an apology, says he should not have made those comments, apologizes for those comments. And then within the last few hours, we see a CNN report with citing American officials that say they fear that the Iron Dome, the air defense systems here in a full-on conflict, would be overwhelmed. That's something we've talked about at length, but we see it picking up. These headlines are picking up steam in the U.S. media circuit. So, you know, there's certainly a lot of concern about what a full-on conflict with Hezbollah would look like. We're seeing a lot of commentary in the U.S. and the States, waking up to that fact quite a bit. But the last 48 hours of commentary and media headlines about Hezbollah, about a conflict with a full-on conflict, have been remarkable to watch. And certainly the unease that's spreading here is palpable.
All right, Zach Anders, Northern Israel, thank you for that. And I guess it just picks up on your former question. Is the U.S. Helping Israel in the north in a way, or is it restraining Israel?
Yeah, restraining. We know it. We know that it's restrained. And Ambassador Liu said that everyone wants an agreement. So I want to understand an agreement after Hezbollah wage war against us without any provocation from the side of Israel, burn lots of fields, destroyed many places in Israel, and in response we ask Hezbollah to sign a paper with us. What is the image of Israel in all this area would be after such a defeat?
Right. Joe, I want to give you have about 40 seconds to respond.
The official position of Israel that we don't want to dismantle Hamas in the context of the war that is coming, but we want them to go to the 1701 line. This is the official position of Israel.
Dismantle Hezbollah.
Not to dismantle Hezbollah.
Right, but
the official
right,
position is to push Hezbollah to the 1701 line. If this is achieved by an agreement that later can be forced by force if they violate, we can do it.
All right.
If not, you agree to attack?
No, it's the
and if not, you agree to attack? If not,
of course, what do you mean? We are weighing the.
No, we are doing nothing now.
No, this is the official position of Israel. You have a better position; it's yours.
No,
I'm saying, what's the official position of Israel?
Official position they should withdraw. And if they do not withdraw,
if not, we consider our steps.
Okay, gentlemen, we are going out for a break, but again, agree to disagree on that. Stay with us. We'll be right.
Israel's story must reach the whole world. The I-24 news channel, broadcasting from Israel, with dozens of correspondents throughout the world, brings the truth from Israel to hundreds of millions of people in scores of countries.
Completely gunned down in their beds.
De la frontière qui sépare Israël, the state of emergency and war in Israel. Bringing Israel's story to the world. I-24 news channels. Now on Hot.
Será tu iniciación a la investigación antártica. Antes le llamaban
los organismos que encontramos como peces, moluscos. Siempre lo estamos viendo, nosotros también, yo cuando termino de muestrear los pingüinos, analizamos en el laboratorio.
Vean la posición. Listas. Pivote de 5. 7 hacia atrás. Pivote de 5. 7 hacia atrás. No tienes que quedar enfrente de él.
Welcome to this special broadcast on I-24 News, day 258 of Israel at war. Now, even as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu oversees Israel's military campaigns and its battles for diplomatic acceptance, which we discussed, he finds himself increasingly preoccupied also on the domestic political front with keeping his contentious coalition together. His government is looking increasingly fragile this week, with the Shas religious party threatening to bolt over the failure to advance a bill that would increase its power to appoint municipal rabbis. Another religious party, United Torah Judaism, voicing similar threats over the contentious issue of draft deferments for ultra-Orthodox youth. And National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir locking horns with Netanyahu after Likud sources accused him of leaking state secrets. Now, here is what Netanyahu had to say last night in response to this turmoil in his coalition. I'm sorry, do we have that clip? All right. Okay, we'll get back. All right, we're going to get back to that in a moment. We're going to move back to the conflict in the north, and the government of Cyprus responded today to threats made against it by Hezbollah. Yesterday, Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah said in a public address that the Iran-backed Shiite militia could target Cyprus in its fight against Israel if its fight against Israel should escalate, claiming the Mediterranean island nation had allowed the IDF to use its airports and army bases for military exercises. Well, the two countries have conducted joint drills primarily designed to defend the natural gas facilities that both have established in the East Mediterranean. Cyprus denied that they have ever provided direct military support for Israel and has repeatedly suspended visa applications from Lebanon. Here's what the Cypriot president had to say today.
The Republic of Cyprus is not involved in any way in the hostilities. The Republic of Cyprus is not a part of the problem. The Republic of Cyprus is part of the solution. And our role, as it was manifested, for example, through the humanitarian corridor, is recognized not only by the Arab world, but by the entire international community. Of course, there is a channel of communication with the government of Lebanon and the government of Iran. There is a channel of communication through the diplomatic route. The statements are not pleasant, and they do not correspond to the truth in the attempt to present an image of Cyprus being involved in military operations. Under no circumstances.
And still with us, Ambassador Dror Adar and Colonel Doron Avital. Well, let's talk about the expansion of the conflicts in Doron. How realistic is that from a threat from Hezbollah towards Cyprus? Something that would broaden the conflict, not only regionally in the Middle East, as we've been talking, but even pulling it into Europe, basically.
Strange comment by Nasrallah. Cyprus is part of NATO, and I think he is losing sight of his size when he wants to really engage with NATO in this context. Of course, Cyprus
is part of NATO?
NATO, yeah.
I heard today that that it is not.
Yeah, I heard that it
is not. It's part of the EU, but not of NATO.
EU, okay. Yeah. EU is strong enough.
But not of NATO.
Maybe you're right. Maybe I got it wrong.
Because if it was part of
NATO,
Turkey, he wouldn't say it.
He wouldn't say it. So, okay, he allowed himself too much. I think to threaten Cyprus is ridiculous. And I don't think Cyprus is part of the equation. And of course, there's no credibility to his blame. Those exercises, as you mentioned, were in the context of the gas and some exercises in the landscape of Cyprus, but this has nothing to do with the conflict that we are in. So I was really surprised by this take. And for me, it's even a sign of some kind, I hope, weakness. But yeah, Hezbollah is a strong enemy, and we'll have to confront him when we'll need to.
Dror, I'm going to get your perspective. You haven't, Doron, you have not seemed to agree on much. He's downplaying those threats. You seem to have a different view.
There is a not hidden, but a silent triangle between Cyprus, Greece, and Israel. And Turkey knows it and watches it. So we have Hezbollah, and we have Turkey, and we have other. It seems, I think, that the EU, my opinion is that even Hezbollah would, God forbid, attack Cyprus, the EU would not respond. They don't want a war in any price, any case. In any case, but I want to say that I heard that it was Prime Minister or President of Cyprus. Right. That he said that they have no intentions to to engage with Israel.
Sure.
It means that he was afraid. The threat did what it was meant to do, and again, the free world does not respond to these bullies in the Middle East and in the world. Not to Iran, not to Hezbollah, not to Hamas, not everyone. I mean, we should. The world, not Israel, the world should respond to this threat and say to Hezbollah, like Biden, don't.
Right.
If you do it, you'll have to deal with us, not with Israel.
Briefly,
I think Israel is an empire, a military empire, a Middle Eastern empire. We can do our war by ourselves. I don't undermine the European Union. You see the European Union in the Ukraine conflict, they take a stand. If you said, you're very much right, that it's part of the European Union. If they attack the European Union country, this would require the European Union to engage. And I wouldn't undermine...
Negotiate.
I wouldn't undermine
they would
the
negotiate.
of liberal democracies that they take time, but when they come up...
Okay. Gentlemen, we're going to move on to Israeli politics, which I think you may also... As I also think you may find some room for disagreement. I do want to... Okay, Doron, I do want to draw, please. I do want to move ahead to Israeli politics. As I explained, Prime Minister Netanyahu is finding it difficult to keep his coalition partners in line, so much so he released this statement.
We are at war on several fronts, and we face great challenges and difficult decisions. Therefore, I must demand that all coalition partners get a grip and rise to the occasion. This is not the time for petty politics. This is not the time for legislation that endangers the coalition, which is fighting for victory over our enemies. We must all focus solely on the tasks before us: defeating Hamas, returning all our hostages, and returning our residents safely to their homes, both in the north and in the south. And so I demand of everyone, put aside any other consideration, put aside any partisan interest. Stand as one, united, behind our troops.
Well, for more, we're joined now by Ariel Kahana, diplomatic correspondent for the Israel Hayom Daily, joining us from the community of Geva Binyamin. And Ariel, a lot of sound and fury coming from the coalition partners, threatening resignations. And we even see within the Likud itself some restlessness about following some of the policies of Benjamin Netanyahu. So how much political trouble is he in, this man who has been such a magician in holding on and keeping his government together these years?
Hello, Galev. It's good to be with you again. So I think you can say that at least when you and I are talking now, it looks that the last scandal or the last problems are behind us. I think, including the video you just showed, I think all of that, and after all sides, all parties, all players understood what would be the meaning if the government will collapse. So I think today things are a little bit more calm, and probably at least until the end of the current session of the Knesset, which means in a month from now, I think things will be still stable. Then you have 2 months of a recession, if I'm saying it correct, until after the holidays, of the winter holidays. So at least for the probably next 4 months, the government will be stable. But we are waiting for the Supreme Court decision regarding the Haredi community going to the army, yes or no, and the budgets. Will it get the budgets or not? Probably will not. And then the Haredi parties will have to decide whether they keep going with Netanyahu or breaking that alliance which they have with him for so many decades, and calculating back or a new phase in the future. I can't tell you now what's going to happen, but again, for now, it looks a little bit better from Netanyahu's point of view. What would the future bring? That I can't tell.
What about within the Likud itself? Because you're right, elections would be bad for all parties currently in the government, according to us. Though the religious parties would maintain their current position. They just might have a less friendly coalition to join. But within the Likud itself, technically, the Likud could replace Netanyahu as in a parliamentary government. And there is some restlessness. But we're seeing how realistic are these a few? I don't want to over-exaggerate, few rebellious voices in the Likud.
So it's a good question. And what happens this week, including mayors who are actually going publicly, mayors from the Likud, who are going publicly against the government in very sharp statements. You are right, we didn't see that for many years. But the bottom line, Kalev, is how is Netanyahu strong or weak? And I want to share with you a short experiment I made today in my Telegram account, if I can talk about that.
Sure.
And I asked my about 6,000 followers in my Telegram group, who would they prefer as Prime Minister, Netanyahu or Lieberman, Netanyahu or Bennett, Netanyahu or Gideon Saar? after all options, about 3/4 supported Netanyahu. So although October 7th, although there is a lot of anger, a lot of problems, a lot of everything, it looks that at least in the right side of the political map, Netanyahu is still the most popular leader. And that tells me at least that he will be here at least for the coming elections. He's here to stay. I can't tell you, of course, who will win next elections, but it looks that he's stronger now than all other options. And therefore, all in all, I think even in the Likud, it will come back to the place it used to be.
All right. Arikana, thank you for joining us this evening. And gentlemen, I can give you about a minute. I have a hunch here you're going to disagree. I'll start with Doron Avital, former member of the Knesset himself for an opposition party to Benjamin Netanyahu.
Really, we are talking with a politician that has great skills, but even Houdini has his last trick, so I can't predict when it collapses, if it collapses. But there are two vectors that aims him, the religious Zionist on one hand, and then the Orthodox. If I had to bet who would in the end turn against him, I would bet on the Orthodox.
The ultra-Orthodox.
The Orthodox and not on the religious.
You mean the Haredim?
The ultra, what we call the ultra-Orthodox,
the ultra
or the Haredim, the Shas and United Torah Judaism.
But I don't want to predict. I think in the end we'll have to look forward to a new time for Israel, a time without Netanyahu. His shadow is overextending into the future of all of us, and I think this time has to come, but I can't predict when would this time be.
All right, Drew, certainly.
I thought you wanted to say something about the Haredim, but
he did say that he thought they were the weak link in his coalition.
I want to say that I think that the ultra-Orthodox parties, in a way, do not absorb the time that we are really in a war. They think that we can fight in a war in two fronts and to pass some disputed bills that I don't know for what. So Netanyahu is right in one thing, that he is asking from his partner to be silent and to be focused in the war. What about the future? I don't see now in the political arena a force, especially in this camp, a force that can contest.
In the national, what we call the national or right
national arena. So I don't see another political force, I mean a leader, that can contest his presence. So we'll have to wait and see. But meanwhile, I think that what we saw this week is that even the Haredim understood something, that their power is limited.
In the meantime.
Yeah, in the meantime.
All right. I would like to thank Ambassador Dror Adar and, of course, Colonel Doron Avital for having a very lively discussion here. And as we see, debate is welcome in Israeli society and within
it's a Jewish tradition.
And within the confines of the studio. I would like to thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
I do want to turn, of course, to the issue that we haven't discussed yet of the hostages. 120 hostages remain in captivity in Gaza, and their families are growing more desperate as time goes on. Now, the Hostage Families Forum has arranged the conference, the first of its kind, that brought together hostage families and media experts to help make the global public more aware of the plight of their loved ones. Natasha Kirchik filed this report.
How are you, love? Are you okay? How's your arm? Do you have people with you? What about your heart? What are these bastards doing to you? Does someone dare to touch you? Romy, you're strong. You're strong like I know you are, right?
That's Yarden Gonen. She isn't an actress. She's the older sister of 23-year-old Romy Gonen, who was taken captive by the Hamas terror group on October 7th from the Nova Music Festival in southern Israel. She's been held in captivity in Gaza for over 8 months now, and today her family is one of many families of hostages that have gathered in southern Israel for a very bizarre conference. They're here to meet with journalists and social media experts to hear what they need to do to make sure the world keeps caring about the plight of their loved ones.
Are the families desperate? I would love to say no. I would love to gather all the power we have to feel very, very strong, but I'm afraid it's cracking.
This is Efrat Machikawa. Her 80-year-old uncle, Gadi Moses, was kidnapped from his home in Kibbutz Nir Oz by Hamas on October 7th, along with his stepdaughter and 2 grandkids, who were eventually released in a truce deal back in November.
Our family is neutralized. I don't sleep for about 8 months now. I really don't. And it's hard. I came here today to study. I came here today to listen, to try and find out what is it that we need to do in order to take everybody, but everybody, out of their homes in Israel in order to bring the kidnapped back.
Several international journalists from around the world are speaking at this conference today to give their take on how to best advertise the plight of the kidnapped hostages, like Andy Gering, a British correspondent from the Daily Mail.
There's no solid rule as to what is going to capture the imagination, but my experience as a news journalist is that there is still massive interest, but there's awful suffering happening on both sides. There is appalling suffering going on in Gaza. That's not to take away from the suffering of the families here. You can't interview the hostages. They are in Gaza. So it's difficult to keep moving that story on. But the responsibility falls on you as the journalist to get creative and come up with ideas that do continue to tell those stories.
But for many of these families, the feeling is that the international media no longer cares about their captive loved ones, and that every day has become a fight to be heard. The youngest generation of some of the hostage families have even created a group to try and brainstorm ideas to keep the captives in the spotlight, since they say their parents are burning out. Yuli Ben-Ami is one of them, whose father Oad is still being held hostage.
My father was kidnapped with his boxer, with his pajama, from his bed. So I think that the people need to understand that it's urgent. We need the world to wake up, and we are just exhausted from trying to convince people that they are not have time.
Michael Levy is the older brother of 33-year-old Israeli hostage Or Levy, who was kidnapped from the Nova Music Festival. His wife was killed by Hamas, and their 3-year-old son is now in the care of the entire extended family as they desperately wait for Or's return.
It's clear that the families who are here today have no intention of stopping, trying to make sure that you get your brother's story out. If there's something that you could say to him today, what would it be?
Yeah, I actually did my first tattoo last week. It says whatever it takes, and I'll do whatever it takes to get you back. That's as simple as that. That's the only thing I want to tell him.
Well, that is certainly a message that needs to go out into the world. Now, at the Nova Music Festival on October 7th, Hamas militants, of course, killed over 360 partygoers and kidnapped many others. Since then, what's called the Nova community has established a range of therapeutic services for its survivors and plans to hold a concert in Tel Aviv at the end of this month to raise awareness and funding for further activities. Jody Notelevitz has that story.
On the morning of October 7th, when Hamas militants crossed into Israel and launched a violent attack against the country's south, more than 3,000 people were at the Nova Electronic Music Festival, a short 3.3 kilometers from the Gaza border. As they ran across orchards and fields in an attempt to escape Hamas, more than 360 of the festival attendees were killed. Others were abducted.
We start running east. I ran for 5 hours, 20 kilometers, until I got to Moshav called Patish. And then I hid for 4 more hours in a house of an amazing family that let us in.
Since then, the Nova community has established a wide range of therapeutic services and assistance for survivors, including art, travel, horse riding, surfing, and ice baths. The people organizing the music event were just a loose network of friends. However, during the last 8 months, they have developed a strong bond of support for each other.
I feel much better. There are still breakdowns, I call that. a panic attack, a blocking in the mind. I don't know how to say it, like disconnections from reality. But I'm much better. I'm going out, I can dance, I can smile.
To raise awareness and funding for their operations, the community is planning a 50,000-person concert in Tel Aviv, with performances featuring mainstream Israeli artists alongside electronic scene DJs.
Someone asked me if I can dance again. And in the beginning I said no. And I didn't know if I'm going to dance again. But today I can say that I need to dance again, we have to dance again, not only for me, for all the people that I lost.
At a lake in Tel Aviv, survivors come together for a community day where they may consult psychologists and engage in therapeutic activities.
Once a week, we're meeting here, all the people that survived the Nova and the families of the people that are not longer with us, or the hostages family from the Nova. We just together to take care of each other, to get better in the mental health, just not to be alone.
One survivor says despite losing her partner, she chooses life, to continue and to be out and dance for him as well. She adds that this is her victory.
And one final story, I would say, of hope arising from the tragic events of the past 9 months. For 3 years, Eliran Abergil and his wife Eden tried to bring a child into the world without success. Now, on October 7th, Eliran, an officer in a special police unit, fought in the defense of Kibbutz Be'eri, where he was killed in battle by the Gaza terrorists. This week, his widow Eden gave birth to their son without him. That story in this report, adapted from Channel 12 News.
Mazel tov, my dear daughter-in-law. The Abergil family have waited almost 3 years for this happy moment.
Wow.
This is such a miracle. Eliran trusts us to do everything for him. On October 7th, the day of Hamas's brutal attack, Eden's world was shattered. Her husband, Eliran Abergil, who fought in an elite police unit, was killed.
My husband, my love, I can't even believe I'm in this position. Just last Friday, we celebrated our second wedding anniversary.
On that Black Sabbath, Eliran was called together with his team to defend Kibbutz Be'eri. A missile hit their car, killing 6 of his colleagues on the spot. He remained alone and fought against many terrorists while injured. He managed to kill some of them before he fell. Eden and Eliran met over a decade ago during their military service in the IDF. For nearly 3 years, they tried to bring a child into the world without success. When Eden emerged from the mourning period, she learned she was finally pregnant. Since then, we've been accompanying her, and her journey finally reached its peak at the Laniado Hospital in central Israel.
This is what kept me going through all this pain and sorrow, knowing I have a human being growing inside of me. That with God's help, He will come out and fill our home and our hearts with love.
Eliran Abergil joined the police force 8 years ago. He was an excellent fighter who loved the police and the country. More than anything, his dream was to bring a child into the world, a dream he will no longer see fulfilled. We've won, Eden. Thank you. Thank you, my dear, for bringing this gem into this world. I promise you, I will never leave you alone. This child will always have our support. Eliran is watching him from above, embracing his son.
Well,
Mazel tov to the Abergil family, a small point of light in the darkness. Getting back to our top story of the night, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has released a response to the White House criticism of his comments or his claim that the White House was holding, or the Biden administration was holding up arms deliveries. Prime Minister Netanyahu responding, saying, "I am ready to suffer personal attacks provided that Israel receives from the U.S. the ammunition it needs in the war for its existence. Prime Minister Netanyahu. That ends our broadcast for this evening. Thank you for joining us here on I-24 News.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every